You'll notice he no longer suffers delusions of humanity.
Affirmative.
Well, welcome back, tribe. We're back here for part 2 of our reading. Now, y'all know how this goes. And we're going to do it just like we did last time. We're just going to jump right into it. I ain't going to do too much talking. I'll give you my thoughts at the end of each chapter. So without further ado, roll it. Chapter 3, The Miracle Club. Finding that spiritualism had brought her so much misfortune, Madame Blavatsky concocted a new scheme, and with Colonel Olcott started a miracle club under the auspices of the Brothers of Luxor, who were represented to be a brotherhood of 7 Indian adepts, said to possess miraculous power. This was nothing more than a spiritualist society under a new name. Madame invented the precipitation letter Dodge. Letters mysteriously came from these brothers controlling the affairs of the club. These she generally favored Colonel Olcott with, and drew sums of money from the credulous old gentleman. But with all her craft and the tricks she learned from home, the medium, she was obliged to engage in spirit mediums to bolster up the society. Still, it made no headway. The reason being, spiritualism had become a dead letter owing to recent exposures. Accordingly, a meeting was called to consider the situation. It was held at Madame's apartment on September 7th, 1875. It was decided to throw over spiritualism altogether and found a Theosophical society. Several titles were suggested. Madame proposed La Société des Malcontents du Spiritisme. Another member wished to call it the Egyptological Society, but finally it was decided to name it the Theosophical Society. Its tenets, however, were very different from those of the present society. The theory of reincarnation, which was a chief plank of the present society, was left out altogether. In fact, Madame did not appear to believe in it, for in her book, Isis Unveiled, she says, reincarnation is as rare as the teratological phenomena of a two-headed infant. It is evident, therefore, that the Theosophical Society was not invented. It simply grew and adapted itself to circumstances. It was found necessary in India to make reincarnation the chief plank in order to catch Parsis and Brahmins. The last plank added proved to be a very wide net, wide enough in fact to catch people of every denomination and creed. There is no talk now about putting down spiritualism. In fact, the two cults are at present coquetting affectionately. I predict a wedding in the near future. The fact is, since the Mahatmas have given up precipitating letters and mending china, Theosophy has had to look to spiritualism for its miracles. In Madame Blavatsky's time, he used to get precipitated letters unknown to her, and she was always most anxious to know their contents. Innocent and inquisitive lady, as though she didn't know all about them. Now the society and universal brotherhood, Jew, Gentile, Mormon, Shaker, or anybody else can be a theosophist. All that is necessary is to subscribe to the society and the their EBE, as the farmer said. Mrs. Besant describes the situation thus. Not every member of our society believes in the existence of the Mahatmas. There are many, many who are within the limits of the society who have no knowledge and no belief upon the subject. And it is the rule of our society that no declaration of faith shall be asked from anyone who enters, save in the brotherhood of man, without distinctions that on the surface are set up, so that within the limits of the society you may have a like believer and a non-believer in the present existence or past existence of these great teachers. Strange language this, from one who declared that if there are no Mahatmas, the Theosophical Society is an absurdity. But let us return to the formation of the society. The precipitation of letters became very frequent, but they came from a new quarter, from Tibet. From Mahatmas who were very much more powerful than the Brothers of Luxor. Then for the first time, the story of Madame's wonderful visit to Tibet was unfolded. Thus those miraculous beings, the Mahatmas, Morya and Kuthumi, came into existence. And what sublime beings they are. Listen to Miss Besant, who generally alludes to them as the Masters. They aid in countless ways the progress of humanity, she says. From the high sphere they shed down light and life on all the world, that may be taken up and assimilated as freely as the sunshine, by all who are receptive enough to take it in. As the physical world lives by the life of God focused by the sun, so does the spiritual world live by the same life focused by a occult hierarchy. Next comes the great intellectual work, wherein the masters send out thought forms of high intellectual power, and to be caught up by men of genius, assimilated by them, and given out to the world. On this level also they send out their wishes to their disciples, notifying them of the task which they should set their hands. Let us see how the Mahatmas notified their disciples of the task to which they should set their hands in 1875. The society did not flourish at first, but the horizon brightened when an eccentric Italian gentleman became a member. He called himself Baron de Palm, and he professed to be very wealthy. He said he was a Knight Grand Cross Commander of the Sovereign Order of the Holy Sepulchre, Prince of the Roman Empire, and Chamberlain to H.M. King of Bavaria. He was soon taken ill and died, and by will he left the whole of his property to Colonel Olcott in trust for the society. Here was a windfall. According to Colonel Olcott's computation, it could be not less than £20,000. Madame was equal to the grand occasion. She at once proposed a pagan funeral, and much time and consideration were spent in drawing up a program for the procession, which she said would be a grand advertisement for the society. The procession was an immense success and attracted an enormous crowd. I copy a description of the procession from the New York World, to which the editor added a little sarcastic humor. The procession will move in the following order: Colonel Olcott as high priest, wearing a leopard skin and carrying a roll of papyrus, brown cardboard. Mr. Cobb as sacred scribe, with style and tablet. Egyptian mummy case, borne upon a sled drawn by 4 oxen. Also a slave bearing a pot of lubricating oil. Madame Blavatsky as chief mourner, and also bearer of the sistrum. She will wear a long linen garment extending to the feet, and a girdle about the waist. Colored boy, carrying 3 Abyssinian geese, Philadelphia chickens, to place upon the bier. Vice President Felt with the Eye of Osiris painted on his left breast and carrying an ASP, bought at a toy store on 8th Avenue. Dr. Pancos singing an ancient Theban dirge. Isis and Nephthys beginning and end. One more victim to Amenti we send. Pay we the fare and let us not tarry. Cross the Styx by the Roosevelt Street ferry. Slaves in mourning gowns, carrying the offerings and libations to consist of early potatoes, asparagus, roast beef, French pancakes, Bach beer, and New Jersey cider. Treasure Newton as the chief of the musicians, playing the double pipe. Other musicians performing on the 8-string harps, tom-toms, etc. Boys carrying a large lotus, sunflower. Librarian Facet, who will alternate with music by repeating the lines beginning. Here Horace comes. I see the boat. Friends, stay your flowing tears. The soul of man goes through a goat in just 3,000 years. At the temple, the ceremony will be short and simple. The oxen will be left standing on the sidewalk with a boy near by to prevent them from goring the passers-by. Besides the liturgic hymn printed above in full, the Coptic national anthem will be sung, translated and adapted to the occasion as follows. Sitting Cynocephalus up in a tree, I see you and you see me. River full of crocodile, see his long snout. I hoist up the shadoof and pull him right out. Colonel Olcott made a fine speech at the grave, and everything passed off well, but when some members of the society went to take an inventory of the Baron's belongings, they found that he had but 1 box in the whole world, and that contained only 2 of Colonel Olcott's shirts with the stitched name mark picked out. Now I consider this most scurvy conduct on the part of the Mahatmas. Here was their cherished Sheila, who had given 7 years of her life to them, who had gone through the most severe ordeals of earth, fire, air, and water for them, who had undertaken a mighty mission for them 25 years before, and yet they would not trouble to send such as a thought form to save her from appearing such a consummate ass. Do you think Mrs. Besant is justified in lavishing upon these rascals such fulsome adulation? The ridicule this fiasco brought down upon poor Colonel Olcott lost him his practice, which he said was worth $2,000 a year. All his clients left him. There is no doubt that up to this time he was the dupe of Madame Blavatsky, but afterwards he appears to have thrown his lot in with her and tried to make the best of a bad job. Some members of the society who were present when the Baron's box was opened state that besides the 2 shirts in it, there was an old manuscript which Madame Blavatsky took possession of and from which she fabricated her book, Isis Unveiled. This fiasco ruined the prospects of the society. Madame tried many artful dodges to keep it alive. On one occasion, during a small meeting of the society, a mysterious lady entered the room. She was thickly veiled and strangely dressed. She handed a letter to Madame Blavatsky, bowed, and left the room without speaking a word. She was said to be a messenger from the Mahatmas. Some months afterwards, a member of the society, Dr. Westbrook, discovered that this mysterious visitor was an Irish servant. Madame had promised her $5 to impersonate the messenger, but as she could not get paid, she exposed the fraud. So here in chapter 3, we see that all their previous endeavors from the previous chapters we read have failed. And they're in a constant state of turbulence and rebuilding. No matter what they do, they stay the course of deception, using tricks, illusions. Now, certain things I do think are real, and I'm not going to get into my beliefs here. But I find it strange that they keep constantly trying to rebrand themselves, but maintain the fraudulent acts that they perform. You can also see that they are wishy-washy on the core beliefs within the society. They're saying that they're open to everything. Kind of sounds like one world religion, you know? They're trying to encompass everything in one, so that's also an important reason why we're exposing the fraud, because soon you're going to see how this ties into one world religion and all that other stuff that we're not going to get into here. Something that they also suffered early on is deception within the society. Madame Blavatsky partook in trying to deceive everyone within the society under her. And that also, I believe, led to her downfall. Because I can't imagine that they wanted her to be at the top very long. And I can't imagine them being sad when she transitioned over to the other side. And that sneaky Madame Blavatsky, there's just something about her. We're going to keep reading. We're going to get to the bottom of her.
What? Oh, God, no!
We're going to keep reading. We're going to get to see what her deal is. Something irks me about her. Another important fact in this chapter. They mysteriously come across a wealthy benefactor, but soon he turns up ill, passes away, and leaves them an inheritance. Madame Blavatsky participates in hypnotism and coercion and deception. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some foul play there. But even with their inheritance, they still managed to get in their own way. So we're going to continue on to chapter 4. Chapter 4, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott in India. There was in India at this period an itinerant preacher named Dayanand Saraswati Swami. He was a Brahmin and quite an orator. His preaching drew crowds wherever he went. It occurred to Madame that it would be good business if they could induce him to join them and start a society in India. Accordingly, Madame wrote to him, stating that she represented a society numbering many thousands of members. Among them, she mentioned the names of many scientists in England and America, and she proposed a scheme to him. Colonel Olcott enclosed the following note. Venerated teacher, a number of American and other students who earnestly seek after spiritual knowledge place themselves at your feet and pray you to enlighten them. The result of this correspondence was that a meeting was proposed in India, and early in 1879, Madame Blavatsky, Colonel Olcott, and 2 members of the society went to India and met with Dayanand. Madame, I presume, tried to impress him with her supernatural power, but Dayanand was too cute for her. He denounced the party as tricksters, declaring that their performances were due to mesmerism, prearrangement, and conjuring. Colonel Olcott denounced Dayanand as a humbug. Things looked black, but there was yet slight hope. Mr. Sennett, the editor of the Allahabad Pioneer, was a spiritualist. The colonel communicated with him, informing him of the wonderful phenomena occurring in Madame's presence. The result was an invitation to Mr. Sennett's house. Madame stayed there several weeks, but Mr. Sennett was very disappointed with her tricks. He said she did nothing but table rapping. This proves that Madame's ability as a medium was very limited unless she had the opportunity to prepare the room and was able to employ accomplices. These matters the colonel arranged for her. A bungalow was taken, and Madam was fortunate in securing the help of Mr. and Mrs. Colum. Madam had known Mrs. Colum in Egypt. Her husband was a handyman. They were just a couple to suit Madam. The trio set to work. They prepared the ceilings of the room so that letters would come floating down when required. They prepared a cabinet from which letters to the Mahatmas would disappear and which replies would arrive. Articles placed in the cabinet would disappear. Broken china placed in it would be miraculously mended. Mahatmas were caused to be seen in the garden in the gloaming, and they would mysteriously disappear. There were many other manifestations. These tricks created the greatest sensation, and Mr. Sinnett wrote such glowing articles about them that the Society for Psychical Research considered it necessary to investigate them, and accordingly arranged for Dr. Hodgson to go to India for the purpose. He was fortunate in finding Mr. and Mrs. Colum sick of leading a life of deception and being unfairly treated by some officials who were left in charge of the society during Madame Blavatsky's absence. They made a clean breast of the whole fraud. They explained everything, explained how the bungalow had been prepared for the tricks, and produced a number of independent witnesses to support their statements, including tradespeople from whom articles had been purchased for the frauds. Dr. Hodgson also secured a large pile of incriminating letters written by Madame Blavatsky. Some of them were of extraordinary length, covering several sheets of foolscap. These letters Mrs. Besant declares to be forgeries. Writing experts have said that it is utterly impossible for the letters to have been forged, containing, as they do, every peculiarity of Madame's handwriting, spelling, and composition. But all this evidence is as nothing to Mrs. Besant. She does not require expert evidence. She simply shuts her eyes and in a righteous indignation exclaims, "Forgery! What blind faith!" I will not trouble the reader with the details of this great exposure, as it was commented upon in a press at the time, and the Society for Psychical Research has published a most exhaustive report. After this complete exposure, the Theosophical Society nearly collapsed, and undoubtedly it would have ceased to exist but for the strange conversion of Mrs. Besant, which I would deal with presently. So we see that they try to travel over to Hindustan. Yes, I said Hindustan. That's another topic for another day. To form a connection with the mystic Swami. But we see that their reputation once again was there to get in their way. He wanted nothing to do with them. Want to hear about stuff like that? You can go over to Jim RedWolf's channel. We talk about stuff like that, and it'll give you more context in this video as to why I'm reading it to you. But as they went on with their antics in Hindustan, they attracted attention, got the heat put on them. They attracted the attention of the Psychical Society, and they sent out their investigator, Dr. Hodgson, who came across two of her accomplices who couldn't deal with the guilt that they were feeling, as well as the mistreatment. So they worked along with him, told him everything about how they helped set up all the tricks. And he somehow turns up with a bunch of letters written by Blavatsky incriminating her in scams, basically. And then once again, Mrs. Besant's there to the rescue, running around like a Karen talking about forgeries, deflecting. And they didn't say that she gave any good reasons. So, luckily, we're getting ready to deal with her in chapter 5. But we're not going to do that here. We're going to read that next time. Well, I want to thank you guys for stopping by once again. I truly appreciate it. And next, for part 3, we're going to get into some real good information. We're going to talk about Mrs. Besant. And we're going to see what she did to change the trajectory of the society. But until then, like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for part 3.
Why don't you bring your media cameras over there if you want to see some real truth?
So say good night to the bad guy. Go on.
I am a human being. I exist.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions.
Send the word.